Welcome back to my channel where we break down cybersecurity concepts in simple terms. Today, we will be discussing Clause 8. We'll also understand Subclause 8.1, 8.2 and 8.3, the mandatory documents that are required for the Clause 8. 8 is about implementing the controls and the processes that you discussed in Clause 6 and 7. Remember in Clause 6, we discussed about the controls, the processes that you need to implement. Now, in Clause 8 is where you get the action done. It is all about implementation. Clause 8 is being divided into three subclauses. 8.1 Operation Planning and Control, 8.2 Information Security Risk Assessment, 8.3 Information Security Risk Treatment. Let's read what Clause 8.1 says. The organization shall plan, implement and control the processes needed to meet the requirements and to implement the actions determined in Clause 6. In Clause 6, we had discussed about, if you remember Clause 6, if not, I would suggest go back to my video where I have discussed Clause 6 in detail. But just to give you an overview, Clause 6 was about planning of how exactly you need to address all the risks and how you're going to treat the risk, and also discussing about the objectives about your organization. Ensure that you meet those objectives and about how you're going to manage the changes. For example, I'll say you, in your Clause 6, you said, okay, we have a risk. We do not have secure login in our organization. So let's have MFA. You have just highlighted this. Now, in Clause 8.1, you are going to implement MFA in your organization. So that's what it says. The organization shall plan, implement, and control the processes needed to meet the requirements. So now you know that as per ISO 27001, I have to have secure logins, and for that I'm going to implement MFA. So this is the requirement of ISO 27001. Control the processes needed to meet the requirements and to implement the actions determined in Clause 6. So in Clause 6, if you say, okay, we have to have a multi-factor authentication so that we can have secure login, then that is something that you're going to implement here in Clause 8. Establishing criteria for the process. So you're going to mention the criteria. Okay, we are going to have MFA for all the people who log in to this particular application. But if there is one application which is publicly available and it is not highly sensitive application, then you're not going to have an MFA there. So that is your criteria. Then that becomes your criteria. So it says establishing criteria for the processes. For example, if you have a risk assessment, then you'll say, okay, all high risk we are going to mitigate, but low risk we are not going to currently mitigate. So that kind of criteria, how do you define what is high? How do you define what is low? That kind of criteria you have to establish for all the processes. Implementing control of the processes in accordance with the criteria. So once you mention, okay, all high risks are something that we are going to mitigate, then how do you define, what is your criteria of defining what is high and what is low risk? So that criteria, remember in my previous video of Clause 6, I had told you that risk is defined by likely into impact that it is causing, and based on that you're going to have a criteria of high and low. So that kind of criteria will be there for every for a business unit in your organization. So define that criteria. So that criteria you have to establish, and then after you establish, you have to implement those controls of the processes in accordance with the particular criteria. I hope this is clear. Documented information shall be available. So this, it says that you have to make a proper documentation. Shall be available to the extent necessary to have confidence that the processes have been carried out as planned. So you should have the documentation. It's not only just having documentation, it is also saying you should have a proof that it is necessary. Your document should be such that it can provide the extent necessary to have confidence that the organization has implemented this control. For example, if you're having a backup plan, right? If you're having a backup policy or a backup process, then you should make sure that you have proper artifacts in place, or maybe you should have proper processes in place so that the auditor can have the confidence that the process is being followed and carried out. The organization shall control planned changes and review the consequences of unintended changes. So all your changes in your organization should be in a planned phase. You should have proper tickets for working on the tickets, and you should also ensure that you review those changes. And if there is any unintended changes, just make sure you review them. Why do you need to have these changes? Is it important to have this change? And what if this change fails? What are the consequences that your organization is going to face? So all those things, taking action to mitigate any adverse effect as necessary. So if in case it fails, then what are the actions that you will be taking to mitigate any adverse effect that is necessary as per the change? Like if a change fails and it is causing a huge damage, then how are you going to mitigate? What are the actions that you're going to take to face those consequences? Everything should be documented, and it should be a living document. When I say living document, it should be a document should be updated with the latest date, when it was reviewed, who approved it. It should not be very old. Organization is getting audited today, but then your document is like 5-6 years old. Do you think the auditor will accept it? Because they want the document to be reviewed and updated at least 6 months or 1 year. Ensure that everything is documented. Next it says the organization shall ensure that externally provided processes, products or services. What do you mean by externally provided processes, products or services? Which means third party. If you're having any third party services in your organization, or any processes or any product that are relevant to the information security management systems are controlled. So you should ensure that you're having a proper management, okay, of these third party services that are being provided to your organization. Third party risk management in itself is a very vast topic. We can discuss that in our coming videos. Any third party that is entering your organization will open up doors for risks. So even that has to be managed. In my upcoming videos, we will discuss third-party risk management in detail. But for now, just understand that even all third-party services, processes, products that is being provided to your organization, and if it falls under the information security management system, you ensure that you're having a proper management of these third-party services. Let's now move to 8.2, information security risk assessment. If you haven't watched my video on risk assessment for clause 6, I would suggest you pause, go back to that video and watch that video. The organization shall perform information security risk assessment. In my previous video of risk clause 6, I have completely in detail discussed about how exactly you need to perform risk assessment at planned intervals. But it says that at regular planned intervals, you have to perform risk assessment, or when significant changes are proposed or occur, taking account of the criteria established in 6.1.2. Now, what was 6.1.2? 6.1.2 was about information security risk assessment. See, whenever you have a proper risk assessment in your organization, okay, what is the risk? What is the risk? What is the consequences of the risk? How are you going to mitigate it? What is the category of the risk, whether it is a severity high or low? And when are you going to mitigate that risk? Do you have any ETA for mitigating that risk? Those kind of, whenever you do the assessment, you have to make sure that you have a proper documentation. And it says that this risk assessment, just having one document and keeping it in place is not enough. What it says is you have to ensure that on a regular intervals, on a planned intervals, means maybe your organization can say, okay, every 6 months we are coming and reviewing our risk assessment, or maybe every 1 year we are just coming and checking whether we have been introduced to any new risk in our organization or not. So it says that every 1 year or at a very planned interval, depends on your organization, you ensure that you review your risk assessment, perform a risk assessment. For when should you perform a risk assessment? It could be yearly, at a planned interval, maybe yearly, or maybe every 6 months once, or when any significant changes. Whenever you have any business, right, you will keep introducing new processes, new businesses will come in, some businesses will go out, some new businesses will be coming in. These are the changes that are happening in your organization, right? So whenever any significant change is there, ensure that you're doing the risk assessment again. Risk criteria that you have established in 6.1.a, you are supposed to perform the risk assessment again. So let's read the sentence, it will be clear now. The organization shall perform information security risk assessment at planned intervals, or when significant changes are proposed or occur. Whenever any unplanned changes occur, or when you are having a planned change, also you come back and perform a security risk assessment in your business. taking into account of the criteria established in 6.1.8. Remember, in 6.1 in clause 6, I had told you about the criteria of establishing or doing or performing a risk assessment. Based on that criteria, you do the risk assessment again. Take the same example of my online food delivery app. So we have introduced a new feature in this food delivery app. So this is a new change that has happened, that has taken place in my organization. So whenever a new change is being done, we have to reassess the application. So we have to perform the information security risk assessment again. Why? Because whenever a new feature is introduced, maybe new vulnerabilities are getting introduced. Important for you to do the risk assessment again. I think this makes it clear. The organization shall retain documented information of the results of the information security as risk assessment. So once you do the risk assessment, you have to document what risk assessment you did, what are the outputs, whether you got any major vulnerabilities or not. Okay, after doing as I said, in my online food delivery app, if I've introduced a new feature, then maybe the a vulnerability management, I'll just do a vulnerability scan and see, okay, has it introduced any new vulnerabilities? If it is, then I'll just going to document it. Okay, I'll do the pen test on this application again and see, do I have any new findings? So these are the test results. These are the results of the information security risk assessment. So you have to document, you did a new risk assessment and these are your findings, and if you're planning, so all those things should be well documented. Let's move to clause 8.3, information security risk treatment. Again, this is also mostly dependent on clause 6, which talks about risk treatment. The organization shall implement the information security risk treatment plan. Once you identify the risk, how are you going to treat those risks? For example, the same example in my food delivery app, we have introduced a new feature, and then after performing a scan, I have come to know that there are many vulnerabilities in it. So how am I going to treat? I should have a good risk treatment plan. And I have to also implement a good risk treatment plan. Say I have to have a proper processes for my VAPT. I have to make sure that I have a proper documentation for it. The organization shall retain documented information of the results of the information security risk treatment. Ensure you have a proper documents of the results of your information security risk treatment. Maybe you can have a SharePoint where you can put this risk register or the risk assessment document saying, okay, for this application, we had performed the risk treatment plan, we had performed the risk assessment, and this was the finding, and this is the risk treatment plan we have for this, and this is how we are going to implement it, and this is the date by when we will finish it, and this is again when we are going to retest and check whether the vulnerability has been fixed or not. So this kind of complete results should be documented. That is what clause 8.3 talks about. It just wants you to ensure that you have whatever you had committed or whatever the security plans that you had discussed in clause 6 and 7 should be properly documented with artifacts and results. So if you show that, that would suffice for the auditor. That's all for this video. In my next video, we will be discussing on clause 9. Do let me know how are you finding this ISO 27001 series videos. If you have any comment or any questions, please drop it down in the comment box and I will try to include that in my next coming videos. Until then, thank you. Bye.